definitely wanted to get the Justin Ross talk out of the way first. And then the second thing that really stood out to me from this preseason game, and I'm sure you're thinking the exact same thing, this defense needs Chris Jones. Just point blank, they need Chris Jones.
I think Chris Jones is probably sitting on his couch, wherever that may be.
He's laughing his ass off.
He's just laughing. Like, he's like, I have so much leverage in this situation. The Chiefs, I think, had 2 sacks in this game. One was from Shamari Connor, like a cornerback blitz, because we can't force pressure any other way. And then Danny Shelton had one. And
Drew Tranquill had one too.
Who did?
Drew Tranquill had one, if I remember correctly.
But even then, that's a blitz. Like, the Chiefs were able to force pressure without blitzing. And that's kind of been a theme with Steve Spagnuolo. Like, I don't have a problem with blitzing, but you can't blitz 90% of the time because there's going to be quarterbacks that are going to pick that apart. So you got to be able to force pressure with your front four. And Chris Jones, I mean, I said this earlier, Chris Jones is the centerpiece that the edges work around. Like, without Chris Jones, we don't have any world beaters at defensive end. Chris Jones is what makes those guys, NFL good. Okay, they're NFL good, but he's the guy that makes those guys better. And without Chris Jones, you just kind of have, average to slightly above average defensive ends, and that's not going to be anything special for this pass rushing unit.
Yeah, and not only the defensive ends, but you look at the defensive tackle room behind Chris Jones, and that's what I was watching today, who on the interior could step up in the absence of Chris Jones, and I didn't see much. And you have Derek Nottie, which at this point, we all know what Derek Nottie is here for. He's here to stop the run. He'll play like first and second down, but he's not giving you anything in the pass rush department. Keondre Coburn, he's kind of in the same boat. He's a double team eater. He's a big body, but he's not giving you Chris Jones level play. He's not doing that. And so this team needs Chris Jones, and you could see the defense missed him. Now, I want to stress that I've learned by this point that Steve Spagnuolo defenses generally take a long time to get their crap together. That's just kind of how it's always been. And it's also worth noting that L'Jarius Sneed did not play in this game either. He's a big part of what this defense does too. I mean, if you were to make a list, a pecking order of defensive leaders on this Chiefs defense, Chris Jones is one, but L'Jarius Sneed is probably two, and he was not there today either. But it's very clear that they miss him. Chris Jones, like you said, he has all the leverage. He knows that the Chiefs need him. What the Chiefs do defensively cannot be done without Chris Jones. He's just far too important. That's why I think the people saying to trade him are absolutely insane, because this defense becomes like a bottom 5 unit without Chris Jones. It just does. I mean, I know they've worked hard to add a lot of talent, but it can't all come together without Chris Jones. He's the Mahomes of the defense. They don't win the Super Bowl without him. They don't win the AFC Championship game without him. Go back and watch the AFC Championship game, guys. This team needs Chris Jones.
One thing, we've talked about this all offseason long, and we're going to continue to talk about it because it's seemingly the never-ending saga, but I kind of was like, this is kind of similar to Tyrann Mathieu and Orlando Brown Jr. It's like, we want this guy in Kansas City, and we're going to make sure that we talk to him and try to get a deal worked out. And then it just keeps going. And it's like, why is it not working out? And then they just keep pushing it back. And then they never end up coming back. So I'm kind of confused with what's going on, because at a certain point, you're going to push and push and push. And Chris Jones is not going to budge. And he's not going to come back. And he's going to say, you know what? I'm not playing. And guess what? The Chiefs at that point are screwed. Point blank.
Yeah. And that's why Chris Jones has all the leverage. It's different from a Tyrann Mathieu or a Tyreek Hill or an Orlando Brown, any of those guys. Chris Jones is on another level of importance compared to those guys, for one. And then secondly, the Chiefs could, in some worlds, survive without all of those guys, but I just don't think they can survive without Chris Jones. He's way too important. I think what you said, though, is very true. It always seems like with these guys, it gets to a point where it's like, oh, yeah, it's going to get done. No reason to be worried. And then you're sitting there and you're like, maybe it doesn't get done. Like, maybe the Chiefs just ride this out for one more year. And I'm almost kind of leading towards the side of Chris Jones doesn't get extended this offseason. He plays 2023 in a contract year. And then the Chiefs decide what to do after that if they determine whether or not he should still be paid after that.
And I'll tell you what. Really quickly. I can't remember. It might have been Matt Derrick who said this. Maybe it was Adam Teicher. But he said that if the Chiefs weren't going to pay Chris Jones now, why would they pay him next year?
And that's a fair question to ask. My thing is maybe they're wanting to make sure that there's no signs of age stopping him or anything like that, or just maybe something changes. They're hoping for some sort of material change that allows them to extend Chris Jones for longer, and maybe they're more comfortable with. Like maybe the number that Chris Jones is wanting right now comes down a little bit by next year. You know, there's some things that can change between now and next year that maybe allows the Chiefs to keep Chris Jones, or maybe they don't bring him back and they tag him and they trade him, which I'm not a fan of. I don't want to do that, but at least in that scenario, you're not, losing Chris Jones and he walks away and you get nothing out of it. So I don't know, man. I think if the regular season starts and there's still no Chris Jones extension, that's when you can come to the conclusion that it might not happen this offseason. Maybe there's hope next offseason, but I think this offseason, or this season rather, it's off the table. But you're going to see many, many times Chris Jones is going to come up with some huge play or he's going to get a big sack and everyone's going to be tweeting, pay the man. Like, this is why you pay Chris Jones. And I'm going to be right there with those people saying it. You need to pay Chris Jones. I understand the age concern. I understand Aaron Donald just had a down year and he's in his 30s. But I think Chris Jones has given you at least, 3 more years of, the Chris Jones that we see now. And, if you can get that, even if it's on like a 5-year deal, I don't really care about the last 2 years of the contract. I don't, but just extend the guy.
Well, part of it's like, to a certain extent, you are a byproduct of your environment. And the Rams right now are not very good. And Aaron Donald is otherworldly. He's very good at the sport of football. But when you're surrounded by so much mediocrity and just so much bad, sometimes it's hard to kind of like break through that. And Aaron Donald can't do everything. And we're talking about Aaron Donald having a down year. The dude is still a monster. Like, if that's what a Chris Jones down year looks like, I'll sign up for that right now and pay him what, he's worth, because I also think that the Chiefs cannot afford to keep going by this way of, we don't need you, because eventually you do need somebody. Like Travis Kelce and Patrick Mahomes, they were clearly important enough to get paid, and they were willing to pay Tyreek Hill, but there was a line. I don't think there's a line for Patrick Mahomes, and there shouldn't be a line for Patrick Mahomes, and there probably isn't a line for Travis Kelce. So why not have that same mentality for someone who I would argue is maybe more important to the team than Travis Kelce is?
Well, and then I saw this point made by Matt Verderam of Sports Illustrated. He said, Patrick Mahomes is criminally underpaid right now relative to the market. Travis Kelce is criminally underpaid right now relative to the market. But they both come out and said they're okay with that as long as it helps them keep other good players and helps them win. You already didn't pay Tyreek Hill. You didn't pay Orlando Brown. So if you're not paying Chris Jones, what are those guys taking pay cuts for? What are we saving this money for? Because I love people will bring up, Creed Humphrey, L'Jarius Sneed. We got to extend those guys. I understand. I hear you. I want Chris Jones over those guys first, though. And
go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to finish by saying that Chris Jones is one of those guys, like, you can't afford to lose. I understand the Chiefs and Chiefs fans are obsessed with this idea that you got to keep the window open as long as possible and you don't want to overpay guys, yada, yada. But you're not winning any Super Bowls without Chris Jones. Not at this moment. Maybe later down the line, once Chris Jones does start to decline, then we can talk about what you do with him and what you do outside of him. But as for right now, as for the next 2 to 3 years, you're not winning any Super Bowls without Chris Jones.
My philosophy with football is you have to pay and keep like core players intact, like guys that are true difference makers. And the Chiefs have a long history of doing some things exceptionally well and some things not exceptionally well. And I would argue that they do drafting better than most teams, but at positions like center and positions like cornerback, they've never really drafted defensive tackle that well. So you can afford, listen, I want to keep Creed and I want to keep L'Jarius Sneed. Those guys were both day 2 picks, and Chris Jones was as well. But I'm way less concerned about, replacing a cornerback, and that's not belittling L'Jarius Sneed, but you can replace a cornerback. We had 7th-round draft picks playing in the AFC Championship game, starting in that game. We were able to win that game because you had a guy up front in Chris Jones that made their job a hell of a lot easier because he's just that much of a monster.
Yeah, I'm glad we agree on this. This team needs to keep Chris Jones. Cole says, do you guys think we should draft Chris Jones' eventual replacement in 2024, or have we already? Regardless if Chris Jones is on this team in 2024 or not, I think they need to draft defensive tackle. Their defensive tackle room in general it's very thin behind Chris Jones. So I guess the answer to your question is yes, but I'm hoping we don't have to draft his replacement, but more so just more behind him.
I certainly think that sorry.
No, it's okay. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I certainly think that we need to draft somebody to, maybe learn behind Chris Jones, because you could always use the depth. But the second part of the question, we do not have a Chris Jones replacement on this team at all.
I agree. I'm glad we got our Chris Jones talk out of the way, though. But back to the preseason game. But we'll stick